What is up, everyone? Dan the Card Man back again. Today we're going to talk through Beckett and why, honestly, they absolutely suck, to quote the great Chael Sonnen. Now, there's a few things we're going to talk to, in particular their grading process and a few cards they've made some mistakes on recently that speak to, underlying problems within their process. But then we'll also touch on some of these announcements they've made that they've backtracked on and why it makes them look really amateur for an organization of their size and with their pedigree, and why it makes them look very similar to the likes of HGA with regards to some of these issues. Now, the first thing we'll touch on is this red PMG that came up probably in the last week with regards to some grading issues. Now, this is a Wayne Gretzky red PMG, as you can see, and unfortunately, as was flagged to me through Sports Card Cartel, because I believe this was a friend of his card, they sent the Gretzky in. They had some photos of what the card looked like before they submitted it. It came back and there was more damage to the card than when they sent it in themselves. Which, in individual, you might ask a few questions, right? On face value, you might say, okay, did the card get damaged in transit? Did it get damaged within the slab? So on and so forth. I very much assume otherwise, just because of the things we've seen from Beckett in the past. And this kind of behavior from them is utterly ridiculous, in my opinion. This is not new. We've seen these things from them for the last 2 years at least. It's been exacerbated during this boom phase, right? I've spoken about them quite a few times over the last 12 months, in particular with things like cards being in upside down within the slabs, wrong labels, fake cards getting in their slabs, repatch cards getting into their slabs, all these sorts of things. This is not new within their modern business process, I want to say. And I know Sports Card Cartel, when he called them out for this error, because this is a horrible error from them on this PMG, right? It's borderline disgusting in my opinion, because they're not offering their customers the service that they should be expected to receive, right? And one thing that Sports Card Cartel mentioned was he doesn't put this in the same grouping as things like mislabels or cards being put in upside down. Whereas me personally, I do, and I'll clarify why that is the case, right? I work in external audit, and I've said that before on the channel, which a fundamental thing within that role is to look at business processes and understand controls and reviews that these businesses have in place to make sure that mistakes don't happen. So when I see cards, going in upside down, back to front, wrong labels, fake cards, all that sort of stuff, in particular, the cards going in upside down and the poor labels, they speak to the same problem. They tell me as an external auditor that Beckett's process isn't very robust. It's not good enough to make sure that the most basic of errors does not flow through their process. And we're seeing things like upside down cards, back to front cards, incorrect labels really, really frequently. So when I see that, it's a huge red flag to me, right? And when you see those things, those are the things that speak to what's happening with this red PMG, right? They're the things that are driving this, right? The poor control environment they have, where they're missing these things on the most basic elements of a grading process, right? Putting in the card the right way. And yes, it's different to the grading element because it happens in the encapsulation process, but the end-to-end process is really, really weak. And you can very justifiably say that by looking at the mistakes they're making. Now, these kinds of mistakes are not limited to just Beckett, but the fact they just appear to be happening so frequently when they're not pumping through anywhere near as many cards as what PSA is doing is, very, very shocking to me. And it speaks to almost how far they've fallen, right? How much they've fallen behind the eight ball with their such slow to move mindset and pace over these last 2 years. They've had a really good opportunity to try and play catch up to PSA and capitalize on these things, yet they continue to make these kinds of mistakes. This Gretzky thing is disgusting, in my opinion. Like, how their process cannot capture the fact what a card looks like when it comes in, right? There's so many things that they could implement within their process. Some of you might say, Daniel, okay, what are your suggestions? Well, it's like, I've said this before, surely they're taking photos when the cards first arrive and they're making sure that the card that's going in the slab looks the same, right? They have a database, all this sort of stuff. There's some very basic things they could implement that would, rectify this process and make it very strong, make it very robust, so you wouldn't see mistakes like this happening with this Gretzky. The fact that you can send a card in, a grail item, right? Because PMGs are incredibly rare, irrespective of what era they came from. Right, you send it in of a key player like Gretzky, and you can imagine it comes back looking like what this one did. That's just disgusting in my opinion. It's not good enough, and people need to start they need to start asking questions a lot more than what they are. They can't let them get away with this sort of stuff. And I know my video might not do anything in the end, but at least it's going to try and educate you guys as viewers to not be comfortable with this. I've spoken to people, there's a guy in here in Australia who sent me a lot of information with regards to the dozens of orders that he sent in that's had issues with Beckett. He's spoken up about it, but there's plenty of others out there that are not. They just get it and they're like, okay, whatever. I'll try and get my refund. I'm not going to talk about it. No, you need to talk about this sort of stuff. You need to put the pressure on them. You put the pressure on them, these kind of mistakes won't happen moving forward. But it just speaks to, like I said, how poor and how far their business has fallen. And that goes on to the second point for today's video, which is, they're backtracking with regards to this news that they make, and then they backtrack immediately. We first saw that with those new slabs, right? They put all these advertisement out at these card shows. They put it up on their, website, and then as soon as they got heat for it, right, because people saw them and like, this stuff looks like crap with regards to these new slabs, they're like, no, that's just temporary, blah blah blah. We're going to not do this. This was just trying to show things off. We're not actually doing it. When everyone in the back of their mind was like, guys, if it is just for show and it's just prototype, why the heck are you advertising it everywhere? Like, it's full of shit from them in the first place, right? So you don't buy that. It looks very amateurish on their part to not necessarily do enough market research with regards to those new slabs. But then we see again today with regards to autograph authentication, where they come out and say, okay, moving forward, guys, if your card does not get a 10 auto, we're not going to put the auto grade on the slab. You're going to see on the database, on the website, that's the only place you're going to see what auto grade you got, which is really, really crap in my opinion. They got so much heat for it and they backtracked it on it immediately. They've already come out and said it's not happening. And honestly, the reasons for them wanting to do this is very sus in my opinion. Like it's so dumb, right? It's so dumb because they're charging you for that autograph grade. So the fact that they're still going to charge people but not put the additional work in on the slab, right? Not put that additional little thing on there, little label to state what the grade is unless it's a 10 is a joke. It's a hidden, they're purely taking, your money and just putting it in their pocket, right? They're not doing the work for it. At least in the past, you could say, okay, I'm getting my value because at least it's going to convey to the buyer that the card has an auto grade, right? As opposed to, oh, it didn't get a 10. That's immediately going to detract, right? It's just a very messy situation. I know some of you might say, well, even if it says an auto 9 on there, it's still going to detract from the price, but at least seeing it on there gives you a little bit more comfort as a buyer. And it sounds dumb, but seeing it there does give you a little bit more substance. The fact that they want to take that off there and hide it behind the fact around efficiencies and all that crap, it's purely there just to, widen their revenue, right? Or widen their profit margin, I should say, not revenue. Because they want to say, okay, we're doing the work regardless, but instead of us printing this additional label and printing a smaller label and then putting it in the slab, we're not going to do any of that. We're just going to put it on the database. That's just so shitty in my opinion. And it's just a way for them to try and take some money and run. And like, people are paying for this service, so they want to see the label. But the thing I want to touch on with regards to their announcements and backtracking, why I said at the very start it's so very amateur and speaks to how far they've fallen, is that it's no different to what we saw from HGA, right? Not long after this boom happened, right? Because they came out and Tyler, the CN, I said it at the time, was so sporadic with his approach. It was almost like he was very anxious. He'd make an announcement overnight, he'd raise prices overnight, and then backtrack immediately in the morning. He'd get rid of their backlog and then backtrack immediately in the morning. He'd put a backlog back in, or he'd change the turnaround times, and then he'd, after 12 hours, backtrack immediately. And I cut him some slack at the time because I was like, this is a new business. I understand what he's trying to do, but this is very poor form on their part. The fact you're seeing similar things from the likes of BGS, who have been around for donkey's years, right, is ridiculous and just speaks to how amateur they are as a business, right? That's just so amateur. I can't state that enough. It is so amateur. Those kinds of mistakes are not what you expect to see from a pillar within the hobby. Mistakes like that, along with the issues within their grading process and encapsulation process and all that sort of stuff, speaks to me that they're, a lot further behind than what people think in terms of where their growth is within this hobby. Like, these mistakes could be severely detrimental to them long term. And I'm not saying they're going to collapse or anything like that. But this kind of behavior, if it continues to, occur little by little and then aggregate, right? Because that stuff will happen, it'll snowball. It'll get to a point where the hobby is going to be completely sick of them, right? And it's just so amateur. We don't expect that from these kinds of guys. So let me know your thoughts on that down in the comments below. Just wanted to share those few thoughts with you today because, like I said, Beckett needs to do a lot better. These mistakes, they've definitely been the worst, in my opinion, out of the the big 3 or 4 graders. If you include PSA, SGC, and CGC/CSG, like, they've definitely dropped the ball the most. When instead of the others, as in PSA has obviously stayed the same and stayed as the clear leader, but SGC and CSG have made a lot of ground, right? BGS, I think, have not won anything within this battle, right? Within the biggest boom within the hobby's history, they've fallen backwards, which is a big red. It's potentially a big red flag for them long term as a business. So take with that what you will. Let me know your thoughts down in the comments below, and as always, thanks for watching.